Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video just to discuss the great update we got today for kind of, I suppose, Warhammer news, just telling us what's going on. So it does look like we will be getting the Tomb Kings with the Rise of the Tomb Kings DLC next year, sometime in mid-January, and actually late January, I suppose. And yeah, so Tomb Kings are coming. There's not really much else to say. New race. Now, there are a few interesting things. One, they're a full price DLC race, but we are not getting a new mini campaign. So in the original, before, and this was one of the only real disappointment I have, or real caveat I have with this release, or this upcoming release, is the fact that the DLC is going to cost the full $19, and we don't get a mini campaign. So I struggled to find the justification for that. Granted, it's a whole new faction, 4 legendary lords. Of course, with the changes, that means there's going to be 4 unique starting positions, probably, the way things have been going. Which is cool. That's great. But definitely, I'm a little surprised that they're charging full price for it, and it's only a faction pack. So compared to Norscar Chaos, who are both full faction packs, those were only 10 for Norscar, 9 for Chaos, I do believe. And so that's the only real caveat I have. Otherwise, though, this is like pretty awesome, and I'm definitely got hyped. And so I'm just gonna go through, and we're gonna discuss kind of what we can see here. So we do get there's gonna be unique campaign mechanics. The objectives are going to be a bit different, even for the Vortex campaign. It's not going to be fighting over the Vortex. It's going to be searching for the Cursed Books of Nagash, and there's also going to be unique canopic. You're going to be able to get canopic jars. There's a unique of course, a unique roster. Of course, they have a unique resource. So yeah, let's just go through what the information is. Now, the information on their main page is a little less detailed than what we have here, or at least on their blog. And so I'm going to just go through what we have on Steam. So of course the objectives, you don't actually seek to, as I mentioned before, you don't really seek to influence the Vortex. Apparently you're going to try to find the 9 Cursed Books of Nagash. I don't know if this is going to be like a global scavenger hunt, or if it's going to be something where you like collect resources in the same way all the other factions do, except they're generating resources for your books instead, and the books would each cost less, probably, than each rite or each ritual and on the step to the Vortex campaign. I'm not entirely sure what the situation there is going to be, but definitely a little interesting. And each book you find is going to grant you a unique campaign bonus, which is pretty awesome. And of course, I assume this is for the Vortex campaign specifically. This is not for the Mortal Empires campaign. A unique resource, which is canopic jars, and based on what we read before, it does look like these are associated with unique resources you get, and you can use them to get unique units, techs, rights, and all this other crazy stuff. Unique items in the mortuary cult. So that's definitely pretty cool. And the fact that you can actually craft items is pretty awesome. I don't know if this is going to be implemented for other factions, if it's going to be unique for the Tomb Kings. Either way, it's pretty awesome. And as you can see, we do have the mortuary cult here, and so you can get Legions of Legend, which I assume are basically just knockoff variant of Regiments of Renown, but with probably some different campaign restrictions. Nonetheless, pretty cool, and the fact that you'll be able to craft is definitely definitely pretty awesome. I don't know if it's going to be RNG based, or if it's going to be something where you can like choose what kind of item you want based on the resources you're able to put in. We'll have to wait and see for that. Probably there'll be some gameplay or trailer or something explaining exactly how that works. Then the technology is another thing that's a little interesting. It says that they're trying to unearth the achievements of their dynastic forebears, but in the gist of it I'm getting is that the technology is going to affect which Tomb Kings you can unlock, which Tomb King lords you can unlock to an extent, or how good the quality is going to be, sort of like the High Elves with their influence. And you can also, of course, get your usual technology type stuff with campaign unit buffs. And then you can also get followers, which is pretty cool. So it's going to be a bit of by the gist I'm getting, the thing I'm getting from this is that it's going to be like technology, but it affects many more different things, and that's just pretty awesome. Then they do have 4 rights, of course, like all the new factions. The first one is the Traz Necrotect, unique hero capable of colonizing ruins at city level 3, which is pretty awesome. That's sort of like the Skaven, and of course, with the fact that that a lot of times, there's a lot of different ways you can make this work. It could be very useful if you're trying to settle a small settlement that's in a strategic position that you need to fortify it quickly. It could be useful if you're trying to basically, if you're just trying to keep your army intact without having to sacrifice troops to colonize the ruins, that's also good. And also, if you're just trying to, if you're going into some bad terrain, it's often difficult to get started up in even orange, much less red quality or inhospitable terrain. So being able to jump your city up to level 3, if it's a ruin, is really pretty awesome. Then we do have the Great Incantation of Xar, which gives you, it's basically similar to the lizard men with one of their, I do believe it's like the plague or something, and it causes attrition. It increases your ambush success chance and confirms an ability that gives you hidden and stalk in battle, which is pretty awesome. I definitely think this is pretty cool. Then you can get increased, basically just an economic buff with increased economic charge generation, province growth, reduced construction time, and you get the ability Tomb Swarm, which is interesting. Tomb Swarm in the game, or in the board game, is was a unit of like undead critters, essentially zombified. Basically, you can think of it as zombified scorpions and spiders and nasty stuff like that. Here it's a swirling swarm of scarabs, but it's basically a free vortex, or a vortex spell you can cast while this incantation's going on. This incantation of Geheb. So that's pretty cool. An interesting way to implement swarms, because I do believe CA has said they're not going to implement them, and it does raise the question of if they're ever going to implement swarms for other factions in some similar manner. And we do have the God of Scholars, which with the incantation of Tahath, which gives us the Casket of Souls, which I'm not entirely sure. Just the thought of it makes me think a little bit of the Lost Ark in Indiana Jones. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, but this will also improve rank bonus, give a rank bonus to Tomb Kings and unit recruits, which is pretty cool. Finally, we do have the Legendary Lords, and we'll go through these really quickly. There's 4 of them, which is pretty awesome. It also means that we're probably going to get 4 Legendary Lords, or 2 additional Legendary Lords for all of our other factions. I do believe this was discussed before. They were saying they're going to do 4. I assume the release method for the for the base factions Legendary Lords is going to be that they'll get a free Legendary Lord, I assume, and then a purchased Legendary Lord in DLCs like Grim in the Grave, in the style of Grim in the Grave and King and the Warlord. For example, for Skaven, I really think, because of all the Scryer tech we're missing Rattling Guns, we're missing Warlock Jezzails, we're missing the Poison Wind Mortars, stuff like that. So I assume that we're going to get a Scryer DLC and we'll get Ikit Claw, and I kind of assume that Throt the Unclean might be our, with Clan Molder, might be our, because of their unique starting location, might be our DLC. For our free DLC, because most of the Molder tech is Molder units are already implemented. So that's just my 2 cents on that, on the issue of the Legendary Lords. And so here we are getting just flat out 4, no additional DLC or anything like that. So we get Cetra, who seems to be kind of a more generic lord. Gives you bonuses to public to order and growth, reduces construction time, which is all really great, nice economic buffs, and then of course upgrades Skeleton Chariots and Tomb Guard. And Tomb Guard is basically like your a better Graveguard from what I've gathered. He has a selection of unlockable mounts, and the mounts look pretty cool. You can get a War Sphinx, a Chariot of the Gods. I don't know what this is going to mean, but still pretty cool. And then we do have High Queen Khalida, who reduces all forms of corruption. And this is interesting in that it's the as we go through and we'll see Arkan later on, it actually looks like the Tomb Kings are, despite being undead, their vampiric corruption is bad for them. Now this makes sense with the lore, because in lore they're very heavily opposed to the vampire counts like Vlad and Nagash and all those sort of characters. But nonetheless, it's cool to see it implemented this way, and she's going to be reducing all forms of corruption. She has a Diplo bonus with other Tomb Kings, and she grants bonus ammunition. And of course, despite being undead, these guys shoot, so that's pretty cool. Also, the poison attacks to all units in her army is pretty awesome, because if for those of you who might have played Gorst, that's one of Gorst's that's one of those things that actually makes Gorst a reasonably competitive pick in campaign. He does confer poison to all of the troops in his army. And so it's one of those things that makes Gorst competitive, and I think this is one of those things that could really make Khalida pretty good, especially given that she already has some of these other improvements. Granted, I don't think the diplomatic relation bonuses will be very significant, because usually plus 10 or plus 20, which on the grand scale of things makes very little difference. Finally, she does suffer less from attrition effects, though still probably suffers some, because it doesn't say immunity to attrition like, say, Durthu. Then we do have Katep, who is the Grand Hierophant, and he is basically it seems to be a bit of a caster. He does have improved casualty replenishment rate, better movement, better research rate, which is pretty awesome given that the research seems to be associated with more things than just tech. And he can also recruit a high number of Lich Priest heroes, so it's a little bit of a Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt mix in there, I guess, as far as traits go. And you can recruit them at a higher rank, so that's pretty cool. Then finally we do have Archon the Black, who's basically the opposite of Kalita, and he has bonus default relations with vampire accounts. Once again, I don't think that's going to be too huge. His regions never suffer public order penalties for vampire corruption, which makes you think vampire corruption affects all the other Tomb Kings poorly. Here, his hero, and much like Isabella von Karstein, his heroes are a lot better, and when they're embedded in his army, and all his armies gain a faction by boost to their winds of magic, which is nifty, assuming this faction is going to be more magic based, which it may or may not be. I'm not entirely sure. Some factions don't really rely on magic too much, so this may or may not be really useful. Then for lords, there's only one lord with this faction, which is a little disappointing. I was definitely hoping for at least two, like the other factions, but one's tolerable. And he, of course, gets some fancy mounts. You can get also sort of Regiment of Renown or pseudo-legendary lords, apparently, famous rulers from 6th Dynasty of Nekar in history. This makes me think that it's going to be something similar to Alistair the White Lion for the High Elves, because Alistair right now is a pseudo-legendary lord. You can get him. He does have some unique items. He does have some unique skills. He does come in with armor piercing, for example, and no shield, whereas all the other elf lords, I do believe, come in with a shield and no armor piercing. So he's very much different, and so I suspect this might be the case here with these sort of Regiment of Renown Tomb Kings. Otherwise, they might be, or Tomb King Lords, I guess. Otherwise, they might be a more like just normal normal lords upgraded with influence. Then we do have a hero. The combat hero, of course, does appear to be a Tomb Prince. It seems like all the mounts are the same, which is a little unfortunate. Generally, it's nice if the combat hero can get some sort of better mount. But he does have a pretty cool ability that lets him make units rampage, and as we know from the Witch Elves, this is a really, really powerful thing. Then we do have the Lich Priest, who does have access to 3 lores, the Lore of Light, Lore of Death, and Lore of Nehakar, which is pretty crazy, because I don't know how the Lore of Nehakar will be exactly, but the Lore of Death and Lore of Light just don't seem to go hand in hand, but they're both very powerful lores, because Lore of Light, of course, has great utility, and some damage with banishment, whereas the Lore of Death has absolutely great damage ability. And against AIs, the debuffs are a little less relevant because AI is usually so ridiculous. But nonetheless, again, in Quake Match, it's also going to be great. You're going to have access to some great lores right off. Lore of Light and Lore of Death is more than adequate. And Lore of Nehakar will still be a nice little boost there, I assume. I don't know how it's going to work out. We'll see just how good it is. He can also, it has a unique ability, and this is something I've been noticing that a lot of the factions, a lot of the guys have like unique abilities. He can reduce enemy armor values, which is pretty cool. Finally, he gets the Immortal skill a little faster, and as mentioned, he gets the Skeletal Steed and Skeleton Chariot mounts, which I assume are going to be okay. You'll probably want the Skeletal Steed just for mobility, because you're probably not going to use these guys in combat. Then new hero, the Necrotect. He is basically like the Dwarf Engineer, I think, in some ways. The Master Engineer, though of course I don't believe he shoots, but he acts as a buff for constructs. So the Ushabti, which are like your monstrous infantry, the Tomb Scorpions, the Hero Titans, which are your big beasties, and he improves them. He gives them better abilities. He also does have the usual sort of movement speed improvements when embedded in an army, so definitely pretty cool. Finally, we do have some unique abilities in combat in battle abilities. The Realm of Souls. So just like the Dark Elves have their Murderous Prowess, these guys have the Realm of Souls, and when a certain amount of units dies, they get a massive healing burst. And and there's 3 different stages of this, as we'll see in some of the screenshots above. So definitely pretty cool. One of the things I'm a little interested by is the Tomb Kings in lore. They aren't like the undead who just raise infinite amounts of undead corpses and just have a limitless supply of troops, essentially. From what I understand, they're a little bit like Necrons, where they do have a finite amount of troops, and which is just constantly depleting, but their troops are supposed to be better, and they're not completely just slave to the will of the commander. So I don't know if we're going to see unbreakable units that don't disintegrate or don't crumble. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to be, but I can definitely see that there's going to be some differences between how these guys act on the battlefield compared to undead, even before taking into account all the unit differences. So let's take a little look at the screenshots and just see what we can get. We do, of course, have the Hero Titan here, as well as the Ushabti. The Ushabti, I assume, are basically just going to be like... I assume that they're going to be a bit like the Kroxigors. And the Hero Titan, of course, I assume is just going to be a bit like a giant. Now, one of the interesting things to keep, what I think is going to be one of the interesting things, is that unlike vampire counts, I actually think that these guys are going to be very different from the vampire counts in a lot of the way they play. The infantry core appears to be very similar, but you do have access to shooting. because you basically have those skeleton warriors who are your low tier garbage infantry. They'll probably be a little better than the normal skeleton warriors, but nonetheless probably not too great. Then you have the tomb guard, which are going to be like grave guard basically, from my assumption. And you also do have skeleton archers, which is going to be pretty cool. But I do believe that they're monsters infantry rather than being sort of lightly armored, fairly highly mobile, often flying and that sort of stuff, like you have with undead. I actually think these guys, the Tomb Kings, are actually having really tanky monsters, because a lot of them are like made of stone and they have lots of like fancy armor and stuff. So I assume that they're going to be sort of actually very tanky in comparison to undead monsters, which tend to be incredibly squishy. These guys also seem to lack much in the way of heavy cavalry, because they do have light cavalry, which is pretty cool that you'll get access to light cavalry as an undead faction. Of course, they have chariots, and they do have a certain type of giant snakish mount, but I don't believe their heavy cav will be quite as good as the normal vampire counts. So I think there's definitely going to be a huge sort of shift in the way they play compared to the normal, and of course we'll eventually to the normal undead. And I do think, or the vampire counts, I do believe we'll get a unit list and we'll be able to make more exact predictions then. They also get catapults. So in this image you can also see the hero titans, you can see the scorpions, skeleton archers, which is pretty awesome, and then the catapults. And I actually think these catapults, given that they're like flinging enchanted skulls, I feel like there's going to be a debuff effect associated with it, probably in the same way the plague claw catapult is. But I feel like they might not have the armor piercing values of the other catapults, instead being more AoE oriented like the mortar. Now here we do have Khalida, who looks pretty awesome, very colorful. Definitely, it's actually I think a very nicely done model. Looks really good. You can see the skeleton warriors and then the tomb guard in the back there. I definitely think these guys are going to be pretty comparable to the way the skeletons and grave guard division is in for the vampire counts. Up in the air you can see the carrions. They're basically giant vultures. I'm not entirely sure how they are, giant undead vultures. I'm not entirely sure how these guys are going to be represented, if they're going to be a single entity like an eagle, or if they're going to come in small squads like pterodons or hawk riders. Regardless, they will be a melee flyer, and probably not really anywhere near the best of melee flyers, but still pretty cool to see. This is definitely not a flyer-oriented faction like, say, vampire counts are. So I definitely think, like I said before, there's some massive differences, I think, between the Tomb Kings and the vampire counts. And back here you can see what I do believe is the War Sphinx. Now here we can see, I don't know if this is the Lord mounted on a sort of snake, or if this is a one of their heavy cavalry. I do believe they have a sort of knight unit, that's mounted on snakes, and you can see there appears to be multiple variants of this. If you look over here on the bottom bar, you can see it also looks like there's certain like snake guardians as well. That's pretty cool. I'm not sure on the lore too much, but it looks pretty awesome. And once again, I assume these guys will have at least decent, if not amazing, armor. Unfortunately, we don't get any stat sort of thing here. It also looks like we will have some spear heavy infantry. This does look like the tomb guard, except with spears. So it looks like we'll have some high-end anti-large infantry, and I suppose this is kind of necessary because these guys don't, unlike the vampire counts who have some fast-moving anti-large. It doesn't look like these guys have that much fast-moving anti-large or big anti-large. Definitely no Terrorgeist here. Then we do have more Sphinx, and there's two variants of the Sphinx. I think one's the War Sphinx with like all the troops mounted, and I do recall reading somewhere that it's actually the tankiness in the board game was comparable almost to Steam Tanks, which is pretty crazy. These guys are definitely a little bit like the Necrons, I think, in the Warhammer 40k, more so than like a spammy chaff faction. And you can see this is another sort of Sphinx, and I don't know what variant this is, but it's sort of like a combat-oriented Sphinx. It also does, and yeah, it looks good. We have the chariots, of course. This is, I do believe, on ultra size, but you can see there's light cavalry. They have chariots. They have light chariots, which will probably be fairly mobile. And it looks like the light chariots have a higher model count, comparable to, say, Goblin Wolf riders, and or not Goblin Wolf chariots. Sorry. And this does look to be the sort of the Casket of Souls or whatever it is. And you can see there's just a whole bunch of units, definitely massive unit or model counts. I don't know if they're just rampage or if this is simply the effect from some spell. I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Now here we can see some pictures of just what things look like, which is pretty cool. Nice to see some carrion moving around, flying around. You can see a siege going on. Some sort of debuff here. This might actually be the scarabs or whatever it is. And then this is just pretty awesome. Giant snakes being or giant undead zombie snakes being ridden around by Tomb Guard. So I do think this is going to be their heavy cav. I do believe they're going to be a little bit like Demigryph. They might be a little bit like Demigryph Knights in the sense that like a monstrous cavalry, or maybe Cold One Knights, something like that. But yeah, definitely pretty awesome. And here we can see some of those chariots. I do believe this is the legendary Lord Cetra, maybe I think it is on on his chariot. You can see it's much bigger and it's like fire burning here and all crazy. It's definitely pretty cool. I'm definitely looking forward to what we'll get to see here. Yeah, there was one other interesting thing I noticed, and that was that it does look like there's actually the Ushabti, the Monstrous Infantry, actually have an archer variant, I think, because it's only 12 models, and they carrying around a bow and arrow. And that was one of the things I thought was cool, because obviously we do have most of the Monstrous Infantry in this game, all things considered, behave the same. There's a few unique instances. You have the Treekin, which I think are really the only unique monster in the sense that they're tanky and they're very much oriented on the defense. Everybody else is kind of just like a big melee bruiser, all things considered. And so it's cool if we get a monstrous infantry that actually shoots with bows and arrows. That could be immensely potent. That could be pretty crazy and cool, and just cool to see. I'm interested in how that's going to be implemented. So yeah, it's basically my speculation. A bit makes of my speculation, just going over what we're promised. Of course, I do assume we will see additional info come out in the coming weeks, probably more in detail and all that sort of stuff. Giving us some full unit list as well, so definitely keep a lookout for that. Once we get a unit list, I'll definitely do a video on that. And yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do hope you find this informative and just also hyped as me for the Tomb Kings, and definitely looking forward to it. Yeah, as I mentioned, I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe down below so you can keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about anything, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can, though I can't really promise to be able to answer very much about the Tomb Kings because I'm also in the dark just like you guys about what exactly is coming. Yeah, I suppose that's really it. I do appreciate you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.